Welcome back to the Based Man of Letters. I'm the Based Man of Letters, and I'm joined for a very special discussion about the future of traditional architecture with everybody's favorite, the Modest Milkmaid.
Hey, Based Man of Letters. It's so great to be back on the show. Thank you so much for accommodating my schedule. Sorry I was running a bit late. I had a wardrobe malfunction on the way. But as long as I hold my arms in this exact position, I think everything will stay under control.
Now, Modest Milkmaid, I think you agree with me and our audience that, our cities are just being taken over by these soul-sucking, disgusting, brutalist buildings that are designed to break you. Horrible buildings like the Barbican Center,
Ugh.
Habitat 67,
Ew.
and the Gherkin.
I hate the Gherkin. It's my least favorite brutalist building. And that includes the new mall they just built in my hometown of Deertooth, Wisconsin.
My first question to you, Modest Milkmaid, is a really simple one. What features of traditional Western Gothic buildings should arouse young men's passions?
When you look at buildings that we build nowadays, they're so full of squares. Like, that bitch Tina I went to school with, God, she's shaped like a fridge. And she's a loser. And a second thing that bothers me is, all the buildings are so boxy. You get all these big box stores, like Walmart, and it's why do they gotta look so ugly? I always thought that good architecture was based on, curves. Look at medieval architecture. The fundamental unit of a medieval building was the pointed arch. And who doesn't love an arch with a bit of a point on it? That's why I make my nails so long and pointy. So that when people see them, they're reminded of great medieval buildings. It's like the beautiful Liverpool Cathedral. Or Neuschwanstein Palace in Germany. It's so cute. Did you know it inspired the neo-Gothic Disney Palace in Disneyland? And, oh my god, my favorite is the Hungarian Parliament building. Although I heard Hungary is woke now, so that might move down my list. But when you look at all these buildings, it's oh my god, they're just so pretty and they're so cute and they're so elegant. Young men, they live in this world where they don't see beauty anymore. They live in a world that exists to just siphon ugliness into their heads. But when they go to these places and they see the sweeping curve of a flying buttress or the elegant juncture of a groin vault, I don't know how any virile young man could see that and not be inspired to do the works that God commanded him to do. It's built into young men's biologies to go out and do great things. That's who builds all of these buildings in the first place. When you look at the rising shaft of a marble column, that was a love letter from a young man to the future, wanting to build something that lasted, something that reflected the purpose that God created him for.
And what is that purpose?
To lay down the foundations for a new era.
The feast is o'er. Now brimming wine in lordly cups is seen to shine before each eager guest. And silence fills the crowded hall, as deep as when the herald's call thrills in the loyal breast.
Welcome back to the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. I'm Olivia, and this is Aaron, a gargoyle.
Wait. I didn't see that show. That's how they talk, right?
Wait, which show?
Gargoyles.
Was that a show?
Yes.
About gargoyles?
Unfortunately, you're in the exact age demographic, and so are our listeners. They're going to be mad that you don't know what that is.
Oh, I'm sorry, listeners, but if I haven't undermined my own credibility too much there, today we are going to be talking all about medieval cathedrals. Because I think we can all agree it's a massive lapse, in responsibility on the part of everyone in Western society that there isn't a new one of these bad boys springing up every week. So what's wrong with us, right?
That's funny. I read the same thing on last week on 150 Substacks.
And they're all titled things like "In Defense of Beauty."
Yeah. And they're all run by either the most homophobic woman you've ever met or a man who's never spoken to a woman.
Yeah.
And I think those two people should find each other, and I think that would be beautiful.
Yeah. I think they should, explore each other's architecture. Maybe that
Listen,
would get their minds out of the streets.
I don't care what they do in the comfort of their own home. I just don't need to see it.
I don't know why, but I can't stop writing all these articles about flying buttresses. So obviously there is a technical question we can ask ourselves about what is a cathedral, because we still do build cathedrals in the technical sense, because a cathedral, by definition, is a place with a cathedra.
Big chair.
So a cathedra, yes, indeed, is literally, physically, the seat of a bishop. The bishop being the person who is the theological leader of a diocese, one of the territorial distributions of a church, sort of like the states or the counties of the church. And all sorts of Christian denominations have bishops and have dioceses. It's not just Catholics, it's Anglicans and Episcopalians as well. But I think that when we talk about, the question of why aren't we building cathedrals anymore, especially, in reference to medieval cathedrals, to Gothic cathedrals, and we'll get more into those very soon, the question that people are asking is not literally, why aren't we building more seats to house, bishops? Why aren't we creating more dioceses? It's a more fundamental question about how we are shaping the public realm and about the role of building and of architecture.
Why new building not look like old building? Is it because of wokeness? The answer may surprise you.
Yeah, so when we look at a medieval cathedral, we are, often overawed by its presence, and the amount of craft and the amount of time and the amount of money that goes into it. Many of these cathedrals took centuries to build, most of them, in fact, if we look at Gothic cathedrals from the Middle Ages. And so what we want to do is get a little bit into why people built these things in the first place and what the legacy is that they left behind, why these were so sort of singular to the time and place that they came from, and explore a little bit of how and why do we react often so strongly to these things. So when we talk about cathedrals, these are things that have been built, by the time we get to the Gothic movement in the Middle Ages. These are things that have been built for centuries already, since the early days of the church. Since they stopped killing you for being Christian, people have been settling down and saying, okay, let's set up shop for our bishop here. Here's where we'll build our cathedral. But we're going to be talking in particular about Gothic cathedrals, because the Gothic tradition really elevated cathedral building to new heights, quite literally. Haha, no pun intended. Unless...
They love spires.
They love spires, and we've talked about this a little bit in our episode about fonts, but the Gothic art style is really defined by points and spikes and angles and sort of sharpness in general, especially compared to the Romanesque styles that came before and came after. And of course we have Gothic aesthetics, so to speak, in all sorts of artistic media, paintings and calligraphy and manuscript illustration and all of that stuff. But architecture, I think, really remains the most iconic aspect of the Gothic movement. And certainly it's the part that we still experience and engage with the most.
People pay large amounts of money to go to a different part of Europe to look at them.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you live in America, you've probably walked past all sorts of Gothic-inspired buildings in your lifetime.
Like Hot Topic.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, I'm not going back to that well. I have to restrain myself.
Thank you for your continence. So yeah, I was skimming a great book from the 19th century, actually, that was called The True Principles of Pointed or Christian Architecture, sort of equating, like, this pointed style with Christendom itself. So Gothic architecture also soon became quite synonymous, I think, with Christendom.
With Western Christendom.
With Christendom in Europe by the present day. So it's this very maximalist style. You'll also associate it with things like, carvings of grotesques and very ornamental stone carving, very ornamental style of architecture in general that moves away from these consolidated Roman forms and really emphasizes height and light and sort of detail.
Put statues on everything. Mm-hmm, if you see a single bit of spare space, put a statue on it now. Now take all the statues off.
Exactly. We
Just
don't
leave
like
the
those
plinths.
anymore. And I was reading the beautiful book by the late great Michael Camille, Gothic Art, Glorious Visions, and he talks a little bit about how people interact with cathedrals and the different ways that we tend to analyze them. And try to understand why did people, in the 12th and 13th centuries start to build in this remarkable, extremely novel new style. And he points out that people tend to analyze Gothic architecture or respond to it in one of two ways. The first being a very sort of technical breakdown of, what each element means, what it contributes to the whole, and almost dissecting a cathedral like a frog, in high school or something. Just sort of picking it apart at the, sort of anatomical level. And the second method of analysis that he talks about is the religious analysis, and speaking about these things purely in terms of religious symbols and religious icons. And of course, there's no doubt that both of these schools of thought can contribute to how we understand Gothic architecture, because it is both, a very technical undertaking, and it is, extremely rooted in Christian traditions and Christian iconography. But one of the things that I quite like that he establishes quite early on in this book is that when you are standing in a building, you are standing in it. You are experiencing it. You're not just seeing it. You're not reading a building like a book when you walk inside. The primary experience, first and foremost, is this almost intuitive sensory experience that you have. And cathedrals, I think, Gothic cathedrals especially, work very well at evoking a very particular type of sensory and emotional experience. And this was all quite intentional, because sensory experience was very much at the heart of what the Gothic movement was trying to center. So I was reading writings by Richard of St. Victor, who was a famous churchman in the 12th century, and he has this amazing analytical framework that he develops, in which he divides vision and perception into 4 tiers, essentially. So there's like a whole hierarchy of, sensory experiences you can have that move from, the sort of most fundamental or most basic to the most spiritual and sort of the most enlightened. So the first 2 levels are the corporeal sort of sensory experiences, or the corporeal visions. So the first one is the experience of the outward appearance. It's just walking in, for instance, to a building and looking at it and seeing, okay, that's a banister. That's a, that's a gargoyle.
That is a nice banister.
That's a buttress.
Hell yeah.
That's a nave. Just kidding. I don't think you're a nave.
Oh, thank you.
The second...
I don't think you're a buttress either.
Thank you. The second of the corporeal sort of sensory experiences is understanding the mystical significance, or perceiving the mystical significance of something. So it might be walking into a building and saying, oh, that's a gargoyle. It represents, Satan or whatever.
It represents we need to get this water out of here somehow.
Exactly. But then we move past that into the 2 tiers of the spiritual perceptions. So the third tier of perception is the revelatory perception. And these are sensory experiences of things that are not there, but are experienced through figures and forms. So an example of this would be the visions that many medieval mystics wrote about having. For instance, those of Hildegard von Bingen, where maybe it is provoked by something that you see, but the line between what's physically present and what's spiritually present begins to blur a little bit. And now the final tier of perception is what he called, quote, pure and naked seeing of divine reality. And that's just when you're sort of mainlining the visions. You know, there's you've gone full spiritual. Your brain is fully disengaged from what's in front of you, and it's just experiencing, like, you know, pure divinity directly coming at you, mainlining it from God, basically.
I mean, real, I've never gotten to that one.
No, I get the sense it's quite difficult.
I've never... I was about to say, I've never gone to fifth base with a cathedral.
And so, as we discussed in the last episode, appearance was very important in Gothic art, in medieval art, but it wasn't necessarily sort of the fidelity of like a representational piece of art. They weren't looking for art that outwardly reflected the outward realities of something else. They weren't looking for a photorealistic portrait or a perfectly proportioned sculpture. They were looking for things, pieces of art with appearances that reflected a hidden divine reality. But pieces, you know, of art and sensory experiences that could act as sort of a conduit towards elevating your level of perception. Because visual elements of Gothic art were very much, you know, iconographic and very much aimed at trying to create a bridge between the purely physical and the spiritual. So a good example of this would be the mandorla, which is the almond-shaped halo-type thing that you often see Christ sitting in, sometimes with his mama, in medieval artwork. And this is you know, it's a physical shape, but it also is an emblem of heaven, and it's supposed to be a visual cue to make you think of and connect with divinity.
And it's also a vagina.
And it might be a vagina. Because crucially, you can't, like, you know, study or rationalize your way towards this sort of revelatory state of perception, right? You can only reach it through contemplation and meditation and through this repetitive, extremely introspective, inward-facing process of, you know, examining and ruminating on words and images. And that's why we have all of these things like, you know, rosaries and prayer labyrinths that are meant to guide, you know, begin with a physical cue and guide you towards a more spiritual mode of existing or thinking. Even books, prayer books, were used by monks in a very specific way that was taught to them, where they weren't supposed to be studying it analytically when they read it. They were supposed to be sort of letting their minds wander over it and trying to sort of, you know, take flight into this more intuitive, more detached from, you know, the physical reality state of thinking.
Which is so interesting, because it's I don't want to make every single observation in this episode tie back to the kind of like trad attitude to, or the modern day trad attitude to faith, but that's a way of engaging with space and with art that is quite abstract. Like, I was thinking, like, when you're talking about, like, you don't want to represent the world literally, you want to represent you want to capture some sort of deeper truth. I was like, that sounds like Impressionism. That sounds like Picasso. Like, it sounds like all these 20th... It sounds like fucking Hilma af Klint, for God's sake. Like, it's all of these 20th century artistic movements that are almost kind of like rev-turning to that. But in a way that's sort of like approaching that from a completely different and mostly more secular kind of position.
Yeah, completely. And it's, you know, the intensity and the sort of vividness of the sensory experiences that people describe themselves as having is absolutely amazing. You know, if you read about the visions of Hildegard von Bingen, or really any other medieval so-called mystic, or anyone who, you know, or Joan of Arc, of course, would be another one that we've talked about, then it becomes clear that, yeah, this is an extremely intense experience that people are having that really does cut out this, you know, rational style of thinking. And again, it all stemmed from the sensory experience and the physical experience. So I think this is one of the ways that we can understand the sort of extreme forms of Gothic architecture especially as exemplified in cathedrals, is that they, are part of this context and this emphasis on linking the visual and the perceptive with the divine, and trying to elevate the former to the latter. And of course, we see this carried over into the rites and the rituals that take place in the cathedral. So the choral music and the vestments and the incense, and of course the communion bread and wine, which are the sort of, from what I understand, I've only been to Catholic Mass a couple times, but sort of the, capstone of the Mass experience. They're all, think about it, it's evoking your five senses. You are having a complete sort of full body experience of divinity. And these are all cues that tell you that you are in the presence of a higher power.
Interesting.
There's some really great artwork that sort of describes these different experiences. There's one you can see I've linked there, Aaron. I don't know if you want to click on it. I just think it's a really great depiction of what it feels like to go to Mass if you're a medieval mystic. It's of St. Bridget of Sweden.
Hang on, it's loading. Whoa! Jesus is shooting beams directly into my brain from a giant flying vagina.
So it's great because she's sitting in Mass, she's kneeling, she has her hand on the prayer book, right? She's engaging with the prayers in the scripture, but not in an analytical way, because she's looking up, and up above her, in the cathedral, we can see the spheres of heaven, and there's all these different saints and holy figures, but at the very top in the center there's Jesus and the Virgin Mary, and they're both like, they're holding their hands out and they're shining beams of light directly into her eyes.
They're giving her the full Emperor Palpatine treatment.
No, it's great, but then look down as well at the priest in the front, because in front of her, she's sitting down, and there's a priest at the altar who's kneeling, holding up the communion bread. Oh yeah,
hang on. Ah! There's a guy in it.
Yeah.
And he's shooting a laser.
Well, he's sort of a little naked man rising out of the bread, who we can only assume is, a stand-in for the body of Christ.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's it's hard to tell whether he has just been sent down from heaven or he's being precipitated up to heaven. But yeah, there's this little sort of like burst of flames right above him at the border of this, sphere of heaven. And yeah, it's like he's sort of passing through the veil in one direction or the other.
This is crazy. And then between Jesus and Mary shooting the lasers out of the almond shape, we have just various saints. I just want to kind of to give everybody the physical geography of this very literal scene.
Yeah, exactly.
What she got on that desk?
Those are her attributes as a saint. It's a pencil case and some notebooks.
Nice.
I know, yeah.
Looks like something else. I'm not saying what.
Hey, it's a pencil case. I looked this up because I was curious too.
Anyway.
And so, we have all of these technical developments that occur over the course of the 12th and the 13th centuries, such as the, introduction of things like flying buttresses and pointy spires, and the ability to build thinner walls and elaborate tracery. That's what we call these sort of perforated stone carvings.
Well, I want to circle in on flying buttresses, because I think they're a really great example of like how the form follows function with the Gothic architecture. Because what's the point of a flying buttress, Olivia?
It's just to let a wall be thin but taller.
Yeah.
It's to support a tall, thin wall without making it thicker.
You know what is one of the reasons why you might want a thinner wall, or a wall that, can't support its own weight as well, is so that you can have more fucking windows in there. Mm-hmm. Because that way you get more light in. Mm-hmm. So the flying buttress is, aside from looking cool, looking like a big spider thing, and also having a practical, keep this thing upright function, it also serves the function of let there be light.
Yes, 100%. And yeah, all of these things, these were technological developments, but it's, you have to understand that it's not that people were building flying buttresses or thinner walls because they had developed the technology to do so. All of these technological advancements were in the service of this divine vision. So I have a little quote as well from an engraving that was done on the door of the abbey at Saint-Denis by the abbot Suger, who was... and this sort of ties into the visual excesses and the sort of opulence of the Gothic artwork and the Gothic architecture, what that's serving. He says, "Whoever thou art, if thou seekest to extol the glory of these doors, marvel not at the gold and the expense, but at the craftsmanship of the work. Bright is the noble work, but, being nobly bright, the work should brighten the minds, so that they may travel through the true lights, to the true light where Christ is the true door. In what manner it be inherent in this world, the golden door defines. The dull mind rises to truth through that which is material, and, in seeing the light, is resurrected from its former submersion." I think that sums it all up quite well.
Elevating your humanity. Mm-hmm. I like that.
And I also like this one about, this is him trying to, justify why he spent a lot of money on precious gems. "Thus, sometimes when, because of my delight in the beauty of the house of God, the multicolored loveliness of the gems has called me away from external cares and worthy meditation, transporting me from material to immaterial things, has persuaded me to examine the diversity of holy virtues. Then I seem to see myself existing on some level, as it were, beyond our earthly one, neither completely in the slime of earth, nor completely in the purity of heaven. By the gift of God I can be transported in an anagogical manner from this inferior level to that superior one." So, yeah.
More or less the same reaction that I have walking back on a sunny summer evening, having had 3 pints.
Yeah, that's, I think
I transcend the slime of this material world.
Genuinely, because it says having a few pints, and, God knows the medieval Catholics loved that too.
Oh, yes.
And experiencing something beautiful that you don't get to experience every day. It is almost creates an out-of-body experience. And to me, it's so easy to imagine how going into a cathedral for Mass, as a medieval Joe Schmo would have, just completely evoked this sense of wonder.
I want to actually make another comparison that I think is more apt than, going on the piss in August, which is that... So, and I can't believe I'm leaning on this crutch in 2 episodes out of 3, but there's this, I think, old Tumblr post, or maybe it's a tweet, or somebody said, I thought, when growing up as a Christian, I thought I was having, a divine revelatory experience. It turns out I just liked live music. And I actually think that concerts are a really useful way to think about this, because they are sensory experiences that do kind of take you out of your body a little bit. Because you're getting, lights, and there's, noise, and hopefully it's not just noise, but...
Smell.
Oh, yeah, unfortunately. But you're having this sort of, this experience that's very removed from your usual day-to-day experience, and it's very curated, and it's very intense, and, quite often your mind does start to wander, and you start to have this introspective kind of experience.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Sometimes you're like, damn, sometimes the introspective experience is just, damn, this is a sick tune. God, I love being alive.
Yes.
Isn't being alive great?
Or when you've just walked out of, a really good movie. Oh, man. There's so many of these experiences.
Yeah. I just like concerts, though, because it's so, it's rooted in a specific location with a specific set of sensory experiences that are meant to kind of evoke things for you. But movies are another great example.
Yeah, I think for me, getting on an airplane gotta be one of them.
Nope, I've never experienced any moment of any kind of, transcendent experience at all from an airplane.
I love taking the airplane.
It's like taking the bus, but in the sky.
I mean, taking the bus is pretty transcendental as well. No? Okay. I might be pushing it a bit with that one, to be fair.
Anyway...
Of course, there was another important social and cultural and, dare I say it, political function that all of this conspicuous construction supported. And all of these different sort of public aspects of the church-going experience, and that was something that was evolving in the public, in the secular and the sort of sacred spheres of medieval society throughout the time that we see the Gothic movement kicking off, and that is pageantry. Mm-hmm. Of course, they did not invent pageantry, those medievals, but they did enjoy it, and they did introduce quite a lot of ceremonial aspects to the church-going experience and to public life as well. I mean, things like massive wedding ceremonies and coronation ceremonies and massive public funerals. All things that they worked very hard to build out into these, more and more dramatic and grandiose experiences. And so it should be no surprise that part of the reason why Suger was so keen to do work on his church and to expand its building and to raise its profile was because he was quite a politically important guy, and he knew that he had to fight with the other bishops and the other nobles for the king's favor. And he was very close with the king, and he hosted several ceremonies for opening of different parts of this new abbey building. I should say, actually, he was an abbot, not a bishop, but this was a very important church. It is now a cathedral. So I am including it because I think it functions quite similarly. Mm-hmm. But he hosted several, quite large ceremonies for opening parts of these. The king was there. All of the other bishops from around France would show up as well. So it was a public display of his power. And of course there was a quite self-serving spiritual function as well. Because not only would his power be reflected, during his lifetime in the grandeur of his building, but after his death, then his works would fulfill an important spiritual function. And so Suger sums this up quite well, because he actually wrote quite extensively about the work that he did and why, and left this for posterity. So he tells us, through this memorial we should earn the prayers of succeeding brothers for the salvation of the soul. And through this example, we should arouse in them a zealous commitment to the proper maintenance of God's church. We, therefore, devoutly assenting to their devout and reasonable requests, without hungering for empty glory or demanding the reward of human praise or impermanent earthly reward, lest after our passing the revenues of the church should be diminished by someone's fraud, lest the abundant additions conferred upon the church by God's munificence during the time of our administration should be quietly lost by unworthy successors, we thought it proper and useful to inform present and future readers of the increase in revenue, construction of buildings, and multiplication of treasures in the church of the most blessed martyrs Denis. So what he's saying here essentially is, I thought everyone should know about all of this stuff that I did and how I did it, because then you can pray for me after I'm gone, and maybe it will inspire you to say a few prayers on my behalf. Not only should you be going into church and having this otherworldly experience, but it should make you think of me, your old abbot, Suger, up in the heavens too.
Well, exactly. It's a time-honored idiom of, you can't take it with you. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you shouldn't. The church shouldn't be squatting on all this money. You got to spend it.
And the reason for spending it, again, and the reason for this emphasis on the prayers of his quote future brothers, is because this is kind of your get out of jail free card after you die in the Christian, Western Christian perception. Because there's long, in the Middle Ages, since really the days of the early church, been this idea that there's some sort of intermediate state you experience. So you die, and if you've confessed all of your sins, you die in a state of grace, you will go to heaven. But the reason why you can't just sin as much as you want and then confess right before you die is because you will also wind up having to be purged of those sins, even if you confessed them, and that will be a painful and somewhat arduous experience. And this can be, thankfully, shortened both by doing sort of special acts of commitment to the church on earth, but also by people on earth praying for you after you die. And so we see Suger represented in several different places in his abbey on stained glass windows, and he has a very public, conspicuous tomb with a likeness of himself on it, and that's because you should be looking at Suger and thinking, wow, I'm so glad he made us this beautiful church. I'm going to say a few prayers for him to get him out of purgatory a bit quicker, because he was probably a real swell guy. Now, of course, the more impressive your works are going to be, and therefore the more prayers you're going to get, and the less time you're going to spend being roasted over a spit in purgatory, it's all tied to how much you actually give and how much you actually do. And so if you really want to be zipped right out of purgatory real sharpish, then you better be contributing a whole lot to the house of God, okay? And so medieval cathedrals, as you may be able to guess by looking at them, are quite expensive things to build. In fact, yeah, they can occupy, like, I think some of them are more than 20 or 30% of a city's sort of annual, like, revenue. These were massive projects that they were funding. So Suger, actually, the first part of his essay, which he spends about as much space describing what he actually did as he does spend space on explaining how he funded it all. Basically explaining the, like, financial jiggery-pokery that he had to do. First, we started collecting rents, more vigorously on this piece of farmland, and then we decided to rebuild the fences so our cows would stop escaping, which saved us, £2 a year on lost
beef
cows.
Costs.
Exactly, on beef. Then we told the monks they had to cook their own suppers. We got rid of the catering, blah, blah, blah. we fired the cleaning ladies. This was all to, again, fund all of these works. One of the crown jewels of this whole endeavor was this legal battle that he entered into with a neighboring abbey of nuns. It's quite sad, actually. This is going to make you a little bit sad.
First of all, abbey of nuns.
Yeah, it's called an abbey.
It's what a nunnery.
You can have an abbess.
Oh, yeah.
She's not the nunness.
Cut that.
And basically he dredged up this, like, Carolingian era contract saying that the nunnery or the abbey belonged to him, basically, to Saint Denis, and then had to send representatives to Rome to get the Pope himself to look at this old-ass piece of paper, basically to, engage in this extensive legal battle to dissolve this abbey and reclaim the lands for himself, according to some sort of centuries-old precedent that had been set. This is quite tragic for the abbess, a woman named Eloise, who had retired there to the countryside after engaging in an ill-fated romance with a man named Peter Abelard.
What?
Yeah, that's right. He made Eloise homeless.
Oh my god, this really is a cinematic universe.
To build more windows.
That I had no idea that was coming. That's crazy.
It's bonkers, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty vicious. A lot of the things that he talks about are like, oh, and then we bought up, like, the rights to collect this toll, so now we can, like, ruthlessly extract money from, like, people who use this road or whatever.
It's a bummer, but also this is great. Like, we never get to see this stuff. It's always kind of implied.
Yeah.
But he's like, let me just write down all the bad things I did.
No, I know, it's amazing. And you might be thinking, well, how did people get away with all of this? How did people fund these types of projects? And how are they able to just, throw their weight around like this? Well, I think Suger certainly was, because he was such an important guy. He was really almost second only to the king in France at the height of his power. But believe it or not, a lot of people did get quite upset about these types of projects, because it was often the locals who bore the burden of it. And
exactly, when you said, "Oh, we're gonna like apply our, like, feudal obligations and tax these peasants more enthusiastically," I was like, and I bet the peasants were thrilled about that.
Actually, they were not. And so I'm using Suger, because he was the guy that wrote all of this down. But there are examples of these types of things happening in places all over Europe throughout the Middle Ages. But yeah, I wanted to just lead into this with a little excerpt of an essay that was written by a monk about what he thought about what Suger was doing. So this is by a Cistercian monk named Benedict, who said, There is no comparison here between bishops and monks. We know that the bishops, debtors to both the wise and unwise, use material beauty to arouse the devotion of a carnal people, because they cannot do so by spiritual means.
Got him.
But we who have now come out of that people, who have left the precious and lovely things of the world for Christ, we who, in order to win Christ, have reckoned all beautiful, sweet-smelling, fine-sounding, smooth-feeling, good-tasting things. I really like his
That's
ticking
really
off
good, yeah.
the five senses. In short, all bodily delights, as so much dung. What do we expect to get out of them? Admiration from the foolish? Offerings from the ignorant? Or, scattered as we are among the Gentiles, are we learning their tricks and serving their idols? I speak plainly. Isn't greed a form of idolatry responsible for all of this? Aren't we seeking contributions rather than spiritual profit? How, you ask? In a strange and wonderful way, I answer. Money is scattered about in such a way that it will multiply. It is spent so it will increase. Pouring it out produces more of it. Faced with expensive but marvelous vanities, people are inspired to contribute rather than to pray. Thus riches attract riches, and money produces more money. I don't know why, but the wealthier a place, the readier people are to contribute to it. Just feast their eyes on gold-covered relics, and their purses will open. Just show them a beautiful picture of some saint. The brighter the colors, the saintlier he'll appear to them. Men rush to kiss or are invited to contribute. There is more admiration for beauty than veneration for sanctity. So, now we see the other side of the coin, quite literally.
Ha 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 ha.
And another great example of this type of aggressive fundraising going awry is the cathedral at Amiens, which had a similar sort of program of renovations and restorations applied to it. In fact, it became extremely fashionable to expand and kind of upgrade churches around the time of this Gothic sort of flourishing. And so the cathedral at Amiens, it became quite an expensive undertaking. The bishop and the local nobles were seeing themselves sort of sink further and further into debt, seeing their budgets, increasing and increasing year on year. And so, like Suger, they began to look about for ways to increase their profits once they had kind of attacked the big fish, the nobles, and the local sort of lords and things. Then they turned to taxing the local population, because the town of Amiens was known for money lending. They would lend money to other towns, and the bishop began to claim, I think, a 10% tax on this, on their profits. And in response, the people of Amiens rioted. They began to storm the cathedral and destroy it. They occupied the building for quite some time. I think for about 6 years, the Pope suspended all church activities in Amiens. There was no mass. There were no
Jesus Christ.
religious ceremonies in Amiens for quite some time in the 12th century. And it was only through extensive negotiations and quite a few sort of aftershocks of this type of violence that order was restored to the town of Amiens. So it was a huge deal, and this type of financial strain was very much felt by the local population, and very much did cause problems.
I mean, it's a classic thing you pick up all the time in polling. Would you like a cooler cathedral than the next town over? Yes. Do you want to pay for it? No.
Yup, basically. All right, carry on. Don't you have something to say now?
No.
Oh boy.
I gotta think. I've transcended the slime or muck or whatever of the material world, and I'm thinking about true beauty.
I'm gonna Google search "in defense of beauty" and see how many results are called that. Oh wow, there's a whole book. Oh wow.
What?
Oh man.
What?
From the photographer of Out of the Studio, Extraordinary Friends, and Bob and Rod, comes this exquisitely produced collection of male nudes, an unabashed celebration of male beauty. Accompanied by an eloquent essay on the aesthetics of gay photography, this gem of a book is the ideal gift.
For the based man of letters, you mean?
Yes. Oh yeah, no, here's a great example. This is, of course, a Medium article.
Of course.
In defense of beauty, have you noticed? Contemporary society is obsessed with ugliness. Go no further than the last gasps of modern art. The torturous dribble of oh my god.
Oh, Roger Scruton, here we go.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, he's truly the thinking man's...
No, the stupid man's thinking man.
No, the thinking man's stupid man's thinking man.
Yeah. Yeah, here's another one that's also called In Defense of Beauty.
Yeah.
Wow. When a man meets an attractive woman, he might describe her as beautiful, meaning
Correct.
pretty or sexy.
Oh.
This is a part of beauty, to be sure, but it's not the full picture.
When I describe a woman as beautiful, I am describing them as beautiful. I'm not afraid to use those other words, thank you very much.
I date the death of beauty to the end of World War II.
Oh, no! And how did you feel about that outcome?
Wow. The crazy thing is, though, I don't actually think this is a Nazi.
True.
It's just a guy who's derived Nazi aesthetics from first principles, basically.
Great Spirit, look down on us and us, beckon us onward to victory.
And as a result, you have a big pile of money. But a big pile of money does not a cathedral make. Okay, so you have tormented your peasants, some big strong guys,
Some big strong guys with chisels.
to build it for you,
With chiseled muscles.
or just more accurately, to spend the next 200 years building it for you.
Yep.
And now it's time to talk about a type of guy that has some overlap with the types of guy that we've met previously in the show, which is the Mason.
So the Masons are doing all sorts in the medieval cathedral. They're, the engineering and the masonry and the construction that goes into making these things is insane. I mean, the deepest cathedral foundations are laid, I think, 10 meters deep, which is the depth of the average Paris metro station.
Blah!
And what's also absolutely bonkers, and I'm still, getting this through my head, is the fact that there was very little written down in the planning process for making these cathedrals.
Well, yeah, because of... Okay, so let's talk about who these guys are. Because when we think of Masons, we think of two things. First of all, we think about a lovely man from Sheffield.
It's me, Joe Mason.
Flawless. It's like he's here with us now.
I'm under the couch. Oh no. I'm gonna edit that out.
No, absolutely not. That has
Joe
to...
listens to these.
Yeah, he'll like
I don't want
that.
him to think I'm mocking him.
He'll like that. He's used to it.
Joe, I'm not mocking you. I would never make a mockery of the game.
Anyway, because these guys... When we're not thinking about Joe Mason, we're thinking about guys who cut stone. All right, that's what Mason means now. When we say Mason in a medieval context, it means polymath architect engineers who kind of need to know every single stage of the process.
But are also probably illiterate.
Yes, this is crucial. These are not men of letters. But
they are based.
Yes. Vast majority of architects these days have university degrees in architecture, right? Architects don't come at me to say that I'm hedging my bets. I know verifiably for a fact that's not true. It's also a very academic field where it's like, yeah, you design you have to understand physics and some design principles, but then ultimately you submit a design to the client signs it off, and then it goes to engineers.
Yep.
It's a separate... Engineer and architect are not the same job. Whereas here they are. So, masonry is not an academic profession. It's not something you can get a degree in the Middle Ages. It is a manual profession. And that means that you would get educated by being an apprentice and by joining one of the guilds in your, basically a local masonry guild in your local area, in which you would kind of learn the basics of how to make building not fall down. Because, and this is I jokingly referred to before we recorded this being a sequel to the last episode, and it kind of is, because it's once again an example of, like, specialization among these kind of, like, technical and scientific professions didn't really exist in the Middle Ages. You had to be a kind of polymath, which is why Leonardo da Vinci, for example, has, like, all his sketches are like, a building, a tank, a flying man, another building. And one of the great examples of this, by the way, is a guy called Villard de Honnecourt, who is a French 13th century master mason from Picardy, who survives to us pretty much exclusively through his folio of, like, sketches. A lot of people call it a sketchbook. It's not a sketchbook because it's much more kind of, like, self-consciously meant to be read than a sketchbook. So he says at the start of his folio, Villard de Honnecourt greets you and begs all who will use the devices found in this book to pray for his soul and remember him. For in this book will be found sound advice on the virtues of masonry and the uses of carpentry. You will also find strong help in drawing figures according to the lessons taught by the art of geometry. And so most of the drawings in this book are of buildings, right? Because he traveled around a lot in Europe, which is not a surprise for a master mason because, hey, surprise, you know what most medieval buildings aren't built of in most towns in Europe?
Wood.
Stone. Well, not built. They're not built of stone.
Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah.
So they're built of wood.
Yeah.
And so actually only the largest cities kind of had the sort of demand for a permanent population of masons. Carpenters, you can find carpenters everywhere.
No, blacksmiths out the wazoo.
Yeah. But, like, most towns, realistically, at most, are going to have big stone church, maybe one house. But that's...
maybe like a trade hall or something.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're special.
And so Villard de Honnecourt travels around a lot. He goes as far as Hungary, and apparently he's very thrilled by the fact that he's going to Hungary.
I just ate some goulash in a, how do you say, bread bowl.
This could use some, how do you say...
creme fraiche.
I was going to say some spices that haven't been brought here yet. These people could really do with a bit of Turkish occupation for 100 years to update their palette. So most of the drawings in this sketchbook are of buildings that he went and observed in France, because he was, like a lot of architects now, he was of an artistic mind. He liked drawing. Part of the, like, point of including these in his folio was, like, hey, isn't this interesting? So he has, like, observations about, like, look how this building has, like, fire exits, basically. You gotta remember to have fire exits. But part of it is just, like, this is a cool tower. I like this tower.
Yes, and this is very much in the tradition of what medieval masons and craftspeople would do, because, of course, the stage between being a master and an apprentice, or the transition from apprentice to master, was being the journeyman, right? Mm-hmm. Where you would quite literally journey around and just ply your trade at random places and learn from people on the road and make a name for yourself. So he's obviously not a journeyman anymore, but this is what craftspeople would do. They weren't reading from textbooks, stone carving for dummies, Masonry 101.
Because they couldn't read.
I mean, yeah, obviously
he could
read, but it was not, reading was not crucial to the tradition.
Yeah.
But the oral tradition and the passage of knowledge and skills from person to person very much was the backbone of how these things were done.
What's compelling and about Villard's folio, and what I think makes it kind of survive like as a cultural artifact to the modern day, is the fact that it's not just very detailed sketches of buildings. He's also got some weird stuff. So, there is a sketch of a perpetual motion machine.
And we don't know if it works because no one's ever tried to make it.
Lisa, in this house, we obey the laws of thermodynamics. Yeah, it's basically just a big wheel, and it's like, imagine a Ferris wheel, except like at every point is like a sandbag to create momentum.
It's a good idea. I mean,
it
was a good idea at the time.
Yes. Well, because like this whole idea of perpetual motion, this is something that the Arabs really kind of kicked off, and medieval people got very into it once they found out about it. Never figured it out because, again, literally not physically possible as our current physics understands it. He also has a model of a crossbow with a pinhole sight, which is titled "How to Build a Crossbow That Never Misses." A water-powered saw, and also maybe the earliest representation of clockwork.
Oh yeah, because is this the angel that always points at the sun or something?
Yes, this is the pointing angel, yeah.
So cool.
But he also has some stuff that isn't about mechanics. Because he does have quite a few drawings of animals, including lions, and he has an aside about how you should train lions that I want to read to you.
Please.
I want to describe how a lion is trained. The lion's trainer has two dogs.
The lion's trainer must give him a chisel and a block of granite. Soon he will learn the fundamentals of Freemasonry.
Whenever he wishes the lion to obey his command and the lion growls, he beats his dog.
No!
This puzzles the lion.
Curious.
So much that when he sees the dogs beaten, his own spirits are dampened, and he does what is ordered.
Jesus Christ.
If he is angry, there is no use trying, for he will do nothing, either with good or bad treatment. So, like, massively overestimating, you might say, the empathy level of your average lion.
It just makes me so sad when they hit that dog. But I'm still not gonna jump through the hoop. That's my lion voice.
And one of the other things that's interesting about the Masons as a profession is that, like a lot of professions over the Middle Ages, they get more stratified in the sense that, like, a class divide opens up between the master masons who are, making all the money and the people who are sort of subordinate to them. And there's an amazing quote by Nicolas de Biard, who's a 13th century Dominican preacher, sort of dismissing these master masons who just kind of direct people. He says, "The master masons, holding measuring rod and gloves in their hands, say to others, 'Cut here,' and they do no work. Nevertheless, they receive the greater fees, as do many modern churchmen. Observe, in these large buildings, there is wont to be one chief master who orders matters only by word, rarely or never putting his hand to the task, but nevertheless receiving higher wages than the others. So there are many in the church who have rich benefices, and God knows how much they do. They work with tongue alone, saying, 'This you should do,' and they themselves do nothing."
That's damning.
I mean, if you've ever worked in any kind of professional environment ever, you will recognize this.
The big boss, yeah.
Yeah, but also there is an element of class here where he's saying these guys are supposed to be like manual workers, and they don't do shit. Just like how,
they're project managers.
Yes, exactly.
Project support officer.
Yeah, project managers, which means that they get told what's happening, and then they go and tell somebody else what's happening. And then they sort of do everything in their power to avoid taking a decision or being held accountable in any way.
That sounds like a certain hardworking someone I know. So, Let's talk a little bit about the cathedral workflow management process and how we vertically integrate dynamic. I don't know enough corpo speak to finish that sentence.
Yes, you do. Dig
how
deep.
we vertically integrate dynamic status, dynamic milestone markers, and performance indicators while periodically reviewing key metrics for encouraging success in the cathedral building process.
Can anybody else smell toast?
I just want to talk about how we fluidly and dynamically...
No, we're not. I can't take this anymore.
So, building a cathedral, a medieval cathedral, a Gothic cathedral will never have really a master plan in the way that we think of it, because it is not beholden to any kind of, fixed idea that is set out at the start of the process, right? It's a centuries-long project building one of these cathedrals, and it is kind of a state of constant dialogue between the people who are funding it, the people who are making it, the people who are overseeing this process. So often a cathedral would start with a scale model being built sort of to pitch the idea to the people who are funding it.
Architects in the audience nodding.
Nodding, yes. Paper mache or wood often would be used. Architects probably nodding again.
They're using ye olde medieval blender.
Yeah, no, exactly. What they would do was get up a CAD program, CAD standing for Christian...
Anno Domini.
Christian assisted design.
And they would have like strategically placed candles next to the model to make sure that the light was hitting it in the right way that made it look not depressing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they would do the render where there would be like fully grown trees,
and little tiny people.
Yeah, exactly. And there would be like all these flourishing like flower boxes and stuff.
And he'd say, okay. They'd say to the clients, okay. So what I'm going to need you to do is to sort of like gradually move your head around like this in this specific way, so that you see the sweeping.
Exactly. The terminating vista. Yup. But once this kind of, the fundamentals were agreed upon, then, they would set out kind of the levels of detail and the amount of work that would be involved, but it would actually be quite up to the master mason to arbitrate with all of the lower level masons and craftspeople about, the actual particulars of what was going on. So this smaller model that you would build is not really a rigorous scale model, and the idea of scale plans, again, does not seem to have existed. So we don't really have anything that we could call like a floor plan that has survived from the Middle Ages. There was one that's from the Abbey at St. Gall.
I'm about to make the world's worst pun, but finish that thought.
Which has two things that we should mention about it. The first is that it doesn't really seem to follow any sort of consistent sense of scale, and the second is that it was never actually built. It doesn't exist. So it's quite strange.
Very Borgesian.
Even though, yes, and it was used, inspired Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose, partially. And we have sort of some detailed drawings of like facades and stonework on facades, and so there seems to have certainly been like an interest in planning these things aesthetically, but we don't really have evidence necessarily of this sort of sketch to, stonework process from parchment to, reality taking place in the same way that we might expect. What's your pun?
The pun is, that's right. Instead of having floor plans, they made plans on the floor.
Yes, this is true. So it seems like a lot of the design that was carried out for medieval cathedrals took place at scale. And I mean, this makes sense because the problem with making a scale model and saying, this is a 1 to 50 model is you have to have units of measurement.
Kind of important.
And
1 to 50 what? Goats?
1 to 50 yards. And what's a yard? Well, probably all these stonemasons have come from all over the place, and everyone has a different yard in their village, you know? Everyone has a different definition of a foot, or an inch, or an ounce, or whatever, a chain, a furlong, whatever units of measurement you're using. And so, it's, you very much cannot, categorically be handing people a written plan or letting people sort of work on their own devices. Again, this is where the master mason comes in. But it does seem like a lot of design did take place at scale. So let's talk about one of my favorite things that I will admit I had no idea about before we made this episode. I don't know if you knew about the tracing houses.
I did not know about the tracing houses.
The tracing houses are
crazy.
so fucking cool, man. So these, we have only a few surviving examples from various medieval cathedrals, probably because most of them were, repurposed. But we have at York and Wells in England examples of rooms in the cathedral in which the entire floor was covered in plaster, white plaster. And these floors were used as sort of full-scale sketchbooks by master masons in order to formulate designs for their architectural elements. So, windows and stonework and tracery and things like that. And they're absolutely amazing to look at, and they're really used as sketchbooks for sort of an iterative design process, because if you draw something and you don't like it, you can just scratch it out, or you can plaster over it. So there's layers and layers and layers of drawings that have been built up on these floors that we can look back at and analyze now with, computer imagery. And
again, I know I made the Borges comparison again, but there literally is a short story on exactitude in science, which is about, and I'm just going to quote here, "In that empire, the art of cartography attained such perfection that the map of a single province occupied the entirety of a city." And eventually it gets to the point where they have to build a map of the world that's an exact scale map of the world.
It's great. And one of the things that I really like about these rooms as well is they are in the cathedrals themselves. Mm-hmm. And so this would be built at an early stage in the development of the cathedral building. And rather than actually being, where the masons were working, so some of the early theories about these rooms was that they were used as sort of actual carving workshops or for making templates. To give to the lower level masons. But actually, because these rooms were located in the cathedrals themselves and not near, outside the walls near the stonemasonry workshops, and because they show this really sketchy, again, iterative process, they don't really show finished, polished drawings. They were really being used as like sounding boards. And so you would be able to kind of wander out into the cathedral, look around, and then just go directly back to the literal drawing room and start sketching in full scale on the floor. And then this would be part of the process of creating a full-scale template, which then you would be able to give to the masons and create a pattern for them to work off of. So, yeah, pretty cool. And it goes to show you that even though the planning process for these buildings looked super different, it wasn't that they weren't planning them. It was just that it was this very flexible, sort of integrated process, carried out mostly through word of mouth. So what we've learned about Masons is that they are a, group of people who may or may not be literate. They have quite a high degree of mobility. They travel around quite a bit. There are places where they are often quite highly in demand in large numbers, and in these places they'll all be put up together. And they are also master craftsmen who need to work quite hard for the skills to practice their craft. They often need to work quite hard and be somewhat socially well connected to earn the privilege from a guild or a local organization of practicing their craft. And so they do become quite a sort of special sect of society, right? Because they're all going around sharing their skills with each other. They also are responsible if something goes wrong over the course of building something like a cathedral, right? Because these things tend to collapse on occasion. The spires collapse sometimes when the wind blows. If a wall collapses and someone dies, you might be held responsible. And so it's also very much in the best interests of the masons to be quite guarded about who learns their craft and to defend the members of their trade, quite sort of emphatically those times when something does happen. And so this is where we start to see the emergence of Masons as sort of a special club, as it were, a special sort of sect of society, especially the most skilled Masons, who are known as Freemasons, because they are more free than other Masons. No, that's not true. It has nothing to do with liberty. Freemasons are Masons who work in free stone. Free stone is fine-grained stone that's used for decorative elements of carving. So like these elaborate traceries and these very ornate windows, the stonework that goes in stained glass windows and on the decorating the facades of buildings, or creating all of these sort of grotesque gargoyles and caricatures that go on the outside of a medieval cathedral. And so again, these are the very most skilled Masons, the elite of the elite. And when there's a big project underway, they'll have a whole sort of communal living space set up for them where they'll all be hanging out together. And they will be quite defensive about who gets to come in and who's allowed to be part of this project. And they will be quite particular about who's allowed to have authority over them. And so it is in this tradition that we see the roots of the modern Masonic tradition, which now has basically nothing to do with stone carving, but the sort of secrecy and the inward focused aspects of it, and, the international and, geographically widespread aspect of it, that you could just, turn up to any lodge and be treated like one of their brethren. On the basis of your membership as part of this organization. This all dates back to these medieval guild traditions that come from stonemasons. So yeah, it's actually not all that esoteric.
I mean, it is a bit esoteric. They like esoterica.
Well, most of the esoterica comes from after the Middle Ages, when stonemasons stopped being as important. And then they were like...
And then they started controlling the government.
What do we define our, our organization on the basis of, now that no one is actually carving stones? Gotta be controlling the government.
Crown? Who keeps the metric system down? We do. We do. Who keeps Atlantis off the maps? Who keeps the Martians under wraps? We do. We do. So yeah, that's why the Freemasons are called the Freemasons.
They work into free stone.
And everybody knows that if you want to become the top high winds actor in Britain, you need to become a Mason.
And of course, when you look at the emblem of the Freemasons, what is it?
I actually don't know, because I'm stupid.
It's a compass and a set square. So those are the two tools of the Master Mason. You need to be able to draw circles and draw squares.
I feel like in my head I knew it was something pointy. So that's the story of how to build medieval cathedral. It takes a long time. You got to do a lot of drawings on the ground, point of Gothic architecture is to make you feel like you're at let's say hypothetically, a Big Thief concert in O2 Brixton.
Wow, on a Friday night in April.
Yeah. But this entire episode has been premised on the idea that we can't build cathedrals anymore, and we don't build cathedrals anymore. What I would like to posit is, what if we do build cathedrals anymore?
Whoa.
Because we fucking did. This just happened very recently, and it is insane to me that it does not get talked about. Because it is literally one of the most high-profile events of the last 10 years. The Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris. You may have heard of it at some point in your life. Is a 12th century, but in case you haven't, it is a 12th century cathedral in Ile-de-France, in Paris. It was built in the 12th century. It was initially abandoned following the French Revolution, but Victor Hugo wrote a book that you may have also heard of, called The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which starts with an extended hagiography of how great that building is, and he just instantly overnight made it the most iconic building in Paris. And everybody was like, wait a minute, this place is sick. We shouldn't use it to store wine. We should use it to store Jesus.
Oh, yeah. He also, Victor Hugo, made the town of Leuven in Belgium build all of the sculptures for their town hall, because they had a medieval town hall. And the town hall, I don't know if we've talked about this.
No.
The town hall in Leuven was built in the Middle Ages in a Gothic style. And they built, I think, something like 350 niches for statues, which, presumably would be of, important patrons of the town and the building and saints and, historical figures. But they commissioned 5 sculptures in the Middle Ages, right? They commissioned 5 of them. And I believe the wind blew them off. So they commissioned...
What were they made of? Straw?
5 more, which sank in a shipwreck. Okay, and then they gave up.
That is the strongest argument for iconoclasm I've ever heard.
And that was clearly what they thought, because the town hall niches sat empty until the 1850s. No sculptures whatsoever. And then Victor Hugo came through and wrote to the town council and was like, guys,
this is embarrassing.
This just won't do.
I'm imagining him visiting Edinburgh and just pointing at the National Monument on Carlton Hill and being like, now come on now.
Yeah.
What have we been doing?
Exactly. And so they over the course of the next 2 decades, they just commissioned 350 sculptures. It looks great.
How much? He has so much clout. Anyway, so after Victor Hugo says, guys, this place is sick, actually.
Guys, please.
The cathedral was partially rebuilt in the mid-19th century, directed by the architect Eugène Viollet-le-Duc. And so it's not a purely, I want to emphasize this because the version of Notre Dame that survives to the 21st century is not the medieval original.
Oh, yeah, no, and his renovations, by the way, are super controversial. He adds, a bunch of windows, and they're in grayscale, because he can't figure out how to, make the stained glass in the same way to let the light through. And so a lot of people think that they look really bad.
Well, there's a lot of things that people don't... There's a lot of things about Notre Dame de Paris that people weren't 100% sure how they did it.
Yes.
For example, the roof of the cathedral, which in French is called le charpente. And this is a really remarkable kind of construction where it's this sort of interlocking system of wooden sort of beams that use no nails. It's all wood. It's incredible. How do they use it? Pegs. But don't worry about that. So it's this assemblage of triangular-shaped trusses, and each one of these is a horizontal and vertical beam, and has diagonal rafters that support the sort of the roof cover to distribute the weight, and it's built of thousands of individual pieces of wood. Each of these pieces of wood is obviously from a single tree, and it was cut by hand again because we're really at the very beginning of sort of like mill saws.
Yeah.
It's one of the oldest surviving all-wood structures in the world. Or at least it was. Because on the 15th of April, 2019, the roof of Notre Dame catches fire. It destroys the roof and the spire and a lot of the interior as well. And the day after the fire, President Macron, who you may also have heard of, committed to rebuilding the cathedral in 5 years. I would like to pause here to just address what a demented thing that was to do.
Yeah. Because we didn't know how they did all that.
It would have been a demented thing to do if we did know how to do all that. It's insanity.
Yeah.
And then, of course, history continues, and it becomes even more of a demented thing to say, because you know what happens less than a year after the fire?
What?
COVID!
Oh, yeah.
Which disrupted the entire construction industry.
Yep.
So anyway, just mental madness. So the French government announces a competition to sort of design a restored Notre Dame, and pretty clearly a consensus kind of emerges, because initially there were all these like renders of like what if it was a swimming pool or whatever, or like all these people saying, oh, we should leave it out, we should actually leave the roof open, you know, it's you know, let the space change, etc. But the consensus among the French, le Français, is no, put it back.
Yeah.
Because it has become this symbol of Paris, of the power and beauty of French culture, of the Republic. Mm-hmm. It's connected to arguably the greatest, you know, French writer in history.
Yes,
it's taken on all this additional meaning that it didn't have before the 19th century. I mean, this is a building that has. I mean, it survived World War II, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Like, that's incredible. Anyway, so pretty clearly a consensus emerges. No, put it back, and put it back exactly the way that it was. Don't try anything funny.
Yep.
But if you're going to put it back exactly the way that it was, you're going to have to figure out how the fuck they did it in the first place. And of course, if you're going to really authentically do it the way that it was done originally, you can't use all these modern technologies, because that's going to, if you use purely just modern techniques, that is going to make the material look different. And also, because we're talking about the French, they will pretend that they'll be able to tell.
I can tell this was touched by a machine. It bears the stink of the clanker. Actually, it should look rustic and imperfect. How else will I know that real French hands touched it in between smoke breaks?
Well, the smoke break is arguably the thing that caused the fire.
I think
because there was a renovation and somebody left a fucking cigarette.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Oh, and the last thing to say about this roof, by the way, this like very complicated triangular roof of all these different beams, completely obscured. You cannot see it.
Yep.
Since the original construction, very few people had even been able to look at this thing. So what happens once it's sort of agreed that no, we're just going to put it back, is that this huge network, this huge global network of traditional craftspeople get like assembled, again, from all over the world to try and figure out how on earth do you put this all back? And I want to use the roof because it's one of my favorite examples of this. And there's a great article in, I want to say in GQ, about how they did this, which I found to be a very moving experience to read. So to reassemble the roof, which again, nobody is going to see this. 60 artisans from, I think, like 5 continents, who all belong to a network called Carpenters Without Borders, who were this network of like nerds who had sort of preserved this craft of like of like carving, like building basically wooden structures out of like single pieces of wood using just hand axes.
Nice.
Were kind of assembled to take over the job of building the new roof. And by the way, the only reason this network existed was because of a bunch of Romanian like woodsmen who had kept that tradition alive until the 1990s, and then, you know, various people from France visited and were like, this is actually sick, we should bring this back.
The Romanian farmers are like, you just never know when you're going to have to do some impaling.
Yeah.
We need our wooden stakes.
And the artisans who were working on this cathedral were overseen by a site manager of the Chateau Goudelon project, which is this project in central France, which is trying to rebuild a 13th century castle from scratch, using only contemporary sort of techniques and materials, which is an incredible story in and of itself. We can't even talk about.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so cool. And like One of the first things they have to do is they have to decide what kind of wood to use. So if you're in modern construction, you really don't use green wood because it tends to warp. Green wood.
Oh yeah, greenwood carving. Okay, greenwood
Yes.
framing is also so interesting because it shrinks.
Yes.
But in the Middle Ages and historically, sorry, I'm kind of preempting you, but I'm so interested in this.
Yes.
They would do that on purpose, so it would shrink and
Yes.
lock together.
And and by the way, the only reason they thought they knew to use green wood in this is because of a couple of postgrads who did a survey of the roof and were granted access in 2012. Well, actually, one of those guys ended up supervising the reconstruction.
So fucking sick, man.
And they also, all of these 60 artisans had to get personalized hand axes from a blacksmith in Strasbourg. Because if you're doing that kind of work, you have to have a very tailored ergonomic handle, because otherwise you're going to get repetitive strain injury immediately.
Oh my god.
And so, unbelievably, I am genuinely, my mind boggles at this. Unbelievably, they rebuilt Notre Dame in 5 years. I mean, it opened in December, the fire was in April, so I guess that's technically more than 5 years, but shut up, nerd.
Exactly.
It's too powerful. And I just find this to be I find it to be a really, moving story, because it's essentially all these different people had to come together, and all these different people, for generations, had to preserve these traditions that were entirely redundant.
Yeah.
For basically no, what we would consider now no practical value to any of this, because it's been superseded.
I mean, as someone who's kind of adjacent to these spheres, I can assure you that the practical value is entirely talking down to people who know
Yes.
slightly less about niche historical construction methods than you.
Hey, Olivia, I know. I can tell. But, actually...
You say while playing with my spinning wheel.
Yeah, it's fun. But, imagine, Olivia, if tomorrow a man in, a black suit and sunglasses showed up to your door and be like, the nation needs you.
No,
to
make him
spin
more-
so good that you can save Britain. Because, I get... To me, it's such a, cinematic... I'm shocked there's not already a movie about this. Because it's I'm sorry, now you have to come together, and the eyes of the entire world and a nation of 70 million people are counting on you to do this, suicidally
I think the
complicated thing.
I think the problem is that Americans would make it like a Marvel movie, and from what
Yeah.
I understand of French television, their oeuvre mostly has to do with sort of governmental shortcomings. The number of sitcoms I've seen on Netflix or wherever that are a
Yes.
French group of bureaucrats tries to tackle the biggest burden of their life, planning a new city mall.
Further evidence that the French and the English are one people.
Yup.
Anyway, just gonna throw that grenade out there. So yeah, I think there's basically two things that I learned from this story. Number one, I am genuinely moved by the fact that all of these people who've been preserving this entirely redundant set of tasks were sort of called upon to, save the honor of France, and actually delivered. That's awesome. I love that. That's beautiful. Second thing is, it's really an emphasis of how many of these techniques have either been lost or have been really had to struggle to be preserved, because the information networks in which these lessons and these techniques were learned and then transmitted were not through, a bunch of people in a lecture hall kind of sitting down. It's has everybody read their Plato today? No? That's fine. We're just going to have to wing it then.
It makes you realize, these skills vanish so quickly, and by not being documented, they do just vanish without a trace. And I think it's such a funny contrast, especially when, you have this quote from Suger sort of harkening back, where he says, when you look at this door, don't think about the money and the gold and the gems, think of the craftsmanship and how it beautifies the whole church. But what he spent most of his time writing down was, and this is how we extorted money from these people, and this is how we extorted money from Eloise after her breakup.
Calling it a breakup is softening what happened.
After her situationship. No, just kidding.
I don't think you get to call a marriage a situationship.
No, I know. I'm joking.
That's stolen valor.
Yeah. Stolen valor from people in situationships. Nice, yeah. Anyways.
Here's a message to all the people in situationships. Hey, man. You know what you have to do.
Anyways, and it is the craftsman whose, work was undocumented and was seen as entirely sort of superficial to the process. The whole point of spending all this money on this church was not for the, enrichment of the craftspeople in their name. It was to build something that said, wow, look how much money I spent. And actually knowing how the sausage gets made almost makes it almost devalues the financial contribution, because it makes you realize that actually Suger didn't do all that much.
No.
Mostly just rigorous sort of accounting.
To quote the preacher from earlier, he went over there and said, go over there and do this.
Yeah.
Now that we've established that, we can be building, and we do be building medieval cathedrals still, why are people still saying this? Didn't we just emphatically prove that it was possible? And that actually, isn't it kind of moving and beautiful that all of these skills have been preserved by essentially generations of hobbyists and Romanian woodsmen?
Yeah, obviously the question that is, being asked by people who say things like, why don't we build cathedrals anymore? The point they're trying to make is, why are we not sort of duplicating this exact same thing? I don't give a shit why people did it back then.
Yeah.
And I don't give a shit if there's a good reason to do it now. I just think we should because it looks nice and it stands for an idea of an imagined past that makes me feel good about myself.
Well, I think it's a little bit more pointed than that, which is that we should be. Why don't we kind of expend our surplus value that we create on putting, God in the middle of our public spaces? And there are lots and lots of sort of practical kind of answer to that question. You could quite rightly say, for example, that we built all those cathedrals and we lovingly preserve them.
Yeah.
And they're very important to us, but we don't need more. It's not like there's too many believers to fit in all of our cathedrals. I don't know if you've seen the stats recently, in every single every single developed country, there's something else. There's some other point being made here.
You know what we do build?
What?
Is sports stadiums.
Oh my God, she's going there.
Think about it.
Do it. Go off, Queen.
What could be more spiritual than going to a football match in a packed stadium and screaming with, screaming the names of men and venerating men past and present, all in service of this legacy that, you have not seen begin and you will not see end, but it feels so good just to be part of this centuries-long history, and to go and see, if I go to Leyton Orient, my local club, they have the Justin Edinburgh stand. And, they have the names of the people that paid for the stadium, writ large, so that they can be venerated by future generations to come.
That's
much
right.
In the same way that
Tony Macaroni,
yes!
home of the Set Fair Arena
yes!
in Livingston.
Yes, because also, these edifices that are built, to people's memory and to preserve the zeitgeist and the values of an era, they're very much still going strong. And there is some impressive architecture going into them. And of course, we still have, you talked about Notre Dame, but I wanted to talk about I would say even, a piece of cathedral architecture and artwork that I would say moved me even more than that story, which is the Tesco window in Ely Cathedral.
Fuck's sake! Okay, we need to talk about this. I want to paint the scene here, which is that a few months ago now, Jesus, you and me and Joe Mason were on a lovely day trip out to Ely, which is a beautiful town in Cambridgeshire. That is the site of one of the great Gothic cathedrals in the world, basically. And if you, by the way, go if you can, and if you do go, make sure that you get the annual membership, which is the exact same price as a single ticket, but means that if you want to go back, you can for free.
And then take your ass to the Lady Chapel.
Yes. And so while we were walking around the Lady Chapel, Joe pointed out that there's a line, as is very standard in in a medieval chapel. They have the sort of the sigils of all the people who've paid for it. But because the Ladies' Chapel was renovated in the 1990s, it has all these coats of arms, but it also has like modern banks. It also has
Barclays. Yes,
it has Barclays Bank. It also has like the most 90s sounding computer company
Cambridge
name.
Electronic Industries.
Yes. And then Joe turned to me and said, "Oh, it'd be funny if you turned around the corner, it just said Tesco." And then we turned around the corner and it did just say Tesco.
Yes. Didn't they also have Network Rail?
Yeah.
So funny seeing the Network Rail logo wrought in stained glass in Ely Cathedral. Because I think at least Tesco...
Funnier than Tesco?
Well, because Tesco, I think they went for, like, a historic sort of, like, font
for everybody who isn't British, Irish, or for some strange reason Hungarian.
Yeah.
For Tesco, substitute Walmart, substitute...
In Germany, you could substitute Edeka or Rewe, any mid-range...
Carrefour.
Carrefour, definitely. Any mid-range supermarket chain of your choosing.
Just incredible.
But yeah, I think, as much as you can say, oh, we don't care about, I mean, I remember when I was a child, they were building a new playground in our hometown, and my parents donated like $50 to the fund, and they put a little fence post with our names carved into it on the playground. So I think, these forms of legacy building and of preservation of our loves and our passions and our desires and the things that we want to see exist, into the future are very much still around, and we're all still very much trying to make our mark on the world in the small personal ways that we can. And no, it's not necessarily always about trying to build or fund the house of God, and encrust it in precious gems and pure gold anymore. But if you look around, you do see these little sort of love letters to the future all over the place, actually.
And I think that also, like, I'd like to extend that to kind of like how these cathedrals kind of fit into public space, right? Because, and this is something that we were talking about before the show, that like I really want to emphasize that like a lot of the time the critiques of the what happened to Beauty Brigade, they're like, no, these people don't think about how the building relates to space. I know architects, they fucking talk about that constantly. Like, it's a huge part of the profession is understanding like things like eye lines, for example. Now, there are lots of buildings that are bad for that. That doesn't mean that they always do it well, but like I do kind of feel like I need to defend the profession of architecture from these people a little bit, because they don't have the faintest idea about how any of it works.
No, and people will say, oh, like Gothic eyeliner is like, it makes such a big statement. Well, eyeliner doesn't have to be ostentatious and really thick and bold to make a big statement. A thin, delicate, modern eyeliner can be just as good.
Womp womp. But I think it's really, really... like, as a comparison, I think it's really interesting to ask the question of, like, well, what kinds of buildings do come to dominate, like, public space in urban places, right?
Yeah.
Putting aside all of the cathedrals that we've already talked about, we've already put them in their category, the kinds of things that tend to, like, dominate the centers of cities, aside from car parks, if you're an American, are things like art galleries, for example, museums, for example, sports stadiums, for example, and these are each in their own way, I would say, doing the work that a cathedral would do. For example, the art gallery or the museum, a category of building that does not exist in the Middle Ages.
Yeah. Or how about the freaking train station? How about the Elizabeth line?
Oh,
okay?
I love the Lizzie line.
I feel pretty transcendental whenever I take the Elizabeth line.
Yeah. If you see a building that you find objectively sort of detestable, one of three things has happened. Either the architect has gone with a style that you do not like, which is entirely fair. That's a question of subjective aesthetics. That's a conversation we can have till the cows come home, and because there's basically no way to resolve it. Or the client, the person who's paying for it, has bad taste. Or, and this is really, really fundamental, the budget did not allow for it to be better.
Yeah.
Like, this is why we spend so much time talking about money. If you think a building looks uninspired and boring, it's probably because buildings are expensive.
And they didn't want to tax the locals to the point of inciting violence and becoming, having like emergency law put in place for several years.
Well, this is another thing, is that I kind of have a pet theory that, like, one of the reasons why it's harder to build gigantic, cathedrals or things like cathedrals with public funds is because by and large a lot of countries now are democracies where you actually need to sustain popular consent for these things, which lots of medieval cathedrals did not do.
And believe it or not, the medieval peasants would not say, "Oh, I hope they spend me tax money on more cathedrals. That spire looks really nice at 30 furlongs high, but if only I could give 5% of my annual income to make it 40 furlongs high."
Here is a fun game for you. Go to the local Facebook page of your local newspaper. Find an article that describes an amount of money that your local council spent on anything. And read the comments.
Oh God.
And tell me.
You know what the most upsetting one of these for me recently was? And I need to freaking unsubscribe from the Glasgow Times Facebook page, because it's
one of the worst.
It's a real black pill, as they say. And it was one about the Salvador Dali painting in the
I think I saw
Kelvin
this.
Grove. And the comments were full of people saying, well, why don't they sell it and just put a replica up? It's a Salvador Dali painting.
It's one of the best Salvador Dali paintings,
which makes it one of the best paintings in the world. And it's in Glasgow.
Why don't they just sell it
and put up a replica? No one will know the difference.
Another example that I just love is anytime anybody's like, we should maybe build more infrastructure. Maybe we should build a tram for the city of 500,000 people. It's like, what's wrong with buses that I will never take?
They just want to get me out my car. They want to make it illegal for me to leave my house.
Well, hey, what's more medieval than a 15-minute city?
Yeah, exactly. Not being tied to your land like a peasant.
You know what the only non-walkable cities were in the Middle Ages?
Venice, because you had to take the boat.
I was going to say Mongol hordes.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's going to take you like a day's horse riding to make it through all those fucking tents.
No, you're right. You're so right.
But anyway, I love the Dali example so much.
That's sad, man.
And the other thing that I think is really important when people are like the What Happened to Beauty Brigade kind of get going is that, like, there's a real failure to engage with the fact that Gothic architecture is a style and is trying to do a specific thing and is influenced by a specific set of ideas and is not like necessarily trying to represent something, but it is trying to evoke something in the person who is looking at it. And that is what all the styles of architecture that those people hate are also trying to do.
Yes.
You can debate whether or not they're doing it as successfully. I would say a lot of the time the answer is no. But this is not a representation of objective beauty. It's a historically contingent set of styles that became canonized because of the fact that in Northern Europe that was the style at the time when most big cathedrals were being built. and it became retroactively what cathedrals are.
I mean, it's one of my kind of main gripes with the, like, we need to go back brigade is, like, they're completely unable to formulate a kind of aesthetic argument, mostly because arguments can't be formulated entirely on aesthetic grounds. And, you know, to say, why don't we build things that are beautiful anymore? It's a completely meaningless argument, and it just shows a complete inability to engage with the historical realities of why things were built in certain ways. I think I would respect it more if people were saying, oh, why don't we build, like, exact, perfectly, historically accurate, you know, Gothic buildings anymore? But it's never that. It's always just a picture of some fucking building, and it says, why don't we have beauty anymore? Without any understanding or explanation of why that's, you know, that style served that particular historical era, or why we departed from it. It's just, it's completely sort of cynical.
It is indistinguishable from a film photograph of a woman in the 1970s sitting on a car with massive honkers.
Holding a hot dog.
Holding a hot dog saying, this is what they took from you.
Yes.
And this is why I kind of wanted to talk about Notre Dame so much and really bring out the fact that Notre Dame, all the context of Notre Dame beyond the fact that it is a medieval cathedral. Because I think Notre Dame kind of occupies this and a lot of other kind of cathedrals in especially in Europe occupy a similar place of, like, yes, this is a place of worship, but it also has, because of just it's been around and it's been this dominant presence in the city for so long, it has taken on these additional connotations of, like, this is not just a symbol of the Catholic Church now, this is a symbol of France. It's a symbol of, you know, of the city of Paris. It's a symbol of all of these different things. And lots of other things that are not, you know, big white marble cathedrals occupy a similar kind of place to Notre Dame. Notre Dame is both a product of the Middle Ages, but it's also a deeply modern building because, again, yeah, buildings should be read. Buildings are books. Architects then and now are designing buildings to be looked at and interpreted. They're not just supposed to be looked at and go, like, columns equals good, boxes equals bad. And that's all I'm not on Twitter anymore, but that's all I would fucking see. And I just started to feel like, and this is now, I'm going off, these people don't actually like these things. And can't engage with what they actually are, except as stand-ins for a broader argument that they want to make.
I feel like for me, it's not that I think they don't like them, it's just that I think they like anything. Like, these are the people that liked the Game of Thrones television show. These are the people that play, like, fucking Crusader Kings or whatever.
Actually, no, I've never played Crusader Kings. I'm thinking of Age of Empires. Shut up. Shut up, me.
Like, these are people that watch, like, fantasy anime, who think that J.R.R. Tolkien was the best writer of the 20th century.
Because he didn't put politics in it.
Yes.
One day we'll go there.
You know, these people are idiots, basically. They like anything.
Well, that's about going to do us for another episode of the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. And if you want to
build a medieval cathedral in Woodford Green, please do.
Yes, please do. But also, if you like the show and you want to see more of it, then don't forget to leave a 5-star review. Tell a friend. And if you like, you can leave a Spotify comment. Olivia might read it out on the show.
Yes, I just might. Thank you to Duncan, who says on our Did the Medieval People Think the World is going to End in 1000 AD episode, 5 stars. Maybe the real Weird Medieval Guys were the ones projecting themselves on people 500 years earlier. I think that's true. I think that's quite relevant for this episode, too.
Yes. Not to get political. Well, I'm off to go and start drawing diagrams on my floor. What are you going to do?
I'm gonna go throw some rocks through stained glass windows because I hate beauty.
And you hate Tesco.
And I'm gonna go throw some rocks through the windows of my local Tesco in the hopes that they'll replace them with some historical stained glass.
All right, until next time, take it easy.
Peace and love.